after I dropped you guys off, I was driving back just behind these buildings, and there's this new art project that this old folks home put up right next to it, and it made me crack up just because of what we were talking about before. It's like the art project is all these they're benches on the side of the road, but the benches are made to look like they were built out of mattresses. And then the slogan for the old folks home is on the back side of it. It says, "Night is for sleeping, day is for resting." Yeah, there's kind of a really intense history with the Parliament building and the Empress Hotel there. I don't know how many of you guys went and checked those buildings out or read up on them at all, but they're built by the same guy. And he's quite famous for being obviously an architect. If you've taken the Rocky Mountaineer train, you might have seen the Hotel Banff. He built that as well. The Vancouver Hotel, he built the original. The Art Gallery in Vancouver, he built. So he's a very, very famous architect. His name is Francis Rattenbury. What he's most famous for is not actually being an architect, it's for being murdered. Yeah, so he was the victim to one of the more famous Canadian crimes ever committed. He was married to a woman named Florence, and actually when he got his first architecture job, he had no background studying it. He had forged a resume, and then he just kind of had a natural gift for it, and so he turned out to be very, very successful. And he was married to his wife, Florence. They had 2 kids. And he was in his mid-50s when he met a young woman named Alma. And she was only 23, but she'd already had 3 husbands. So she didn't waste time. And for most of us, that would be a red flag. But 20/20 hindsight. What ended up happening is he became completely infatuated by this young woman, and she became his mistress. And quite openly so. He decided to divorce his wife, so he asked his wife Florence for a divorce, and she said no. And she refused, kind of out of pride, to agree to a divorce, and so they were never divorced. And instead, he just had this young woman, Alma, move into the house with them.
Oh my God.
Ooh. Yes, now he was living with his wife, his mistress, and their 2 sons. So it was just a terrible situation. Everybody in Victoria knew about it. This is where they lived out here in Victoria. Just because he was such a well-known figure and such a respected figure. So his wife, she couldn't really take it anymore. She decided to get out. She moved out of the house. And she moved to Vancouver, where they had a second home. And she actually still wouldn't agree to a divorce. And so in order to help convince her, Francis cut off the water supply, the electric supply to her house, and he cut off all of her finances. Didn't give her any money. And so she had no choice at this point but to agree to a divorce. And so finally they were divorced. And that same year he was married to Alma. And so him and this young woman were married, and you can imagine what a scandal it was here in Victoria. It's all anybody could talk about. And at this point, he had lost all of his respect in the community. His voice politically was completely ruined. He had no kind of say on any political matters anymore. And more or less, his reputation was just completely ruined. And this isn't what this young woman had signed up for. She'd signed up for big money, big political power. She wanted to be with this powerful, affluent man. And he was no longer that. And so she began to have an affair of her own with the 18-year-old chauffeur. George Percy Stoner. More on him later, but he's a pretty famous character. Because she and him, this part of the story is a little bit gray exactly what happened. But what it appears is that the 2 of them conspired to kill him and to get married and to inherit his money. And so sure enough, one day Francis came home and he walked into his study, and standing behind the door was this young guy, George Percy Stoner, this 18-year-old kid. And he hit him over the head with a croquet mallet and he killed him. It's kind of like that board game Clue, if you ever played the chauffeur in the lounge or in the study with the croquet mallet. And he ended up killing Francis, and so turned out he was just a terrible murderer. He confessed to the housekeeper. He had a nervous breakdown, and then the housekeeper turned him in, and he was arrested that day. And Alma was never convicted of anything, even though it did appear like she had been involved in the planning of the crime. And he said she had nothing to do with it, and he was sentenced to be executed. And so this is in the 1930s. He spent 7 years in prison. And after 7 years, he was meant to be executed, but two things happened. The first thing that happened was that the city of Victoria, the city of Vancouver, had 100,000 people sign a petition deeming that he had been manipulated and framed, and that he was too young to be executed, and that essentially he was just a victim of this this woman who was kind of this psychopath. And at the same time, World War II was breaking out, and so Canada had given a lot of its prisoners exemption if they went and fought in World War II, and if they survived World War II, they could be free after the war. So they ended up letting George go and fight in World War II, which he did. He ended up surviving World War II, and he came back and he settled here in BC, where he lived the rest of his life. And he became like fairly notorious towards the end of his life, and they still talk about this court case because much later in his life, when he was suffering from serious dementia, he committed another violent crime. And so for a while they used to refer back to this case when they talked about releasing violent criminals. The story doesn't end well for really anyone. Francis is dead. George had to go fight in World War II. This young woman, Alma, she couldn't stand to stay in Victoria because she was the heart of scandal out here and she didn't like it, so she decided to leave town and move to England, but the rumors followed her there, and she decided to take her own life. The story is that she went to the doctor and asked where her heart was, and the last anyone saw of her, she was standing up on a bridge in London, and she went to stab herself in the heart, but she panicked. She stabbed herself in the knee, and then she fell off the bridge, and they never saw her again. The only person who comes out of the story okay is his wife, Florence, his original wife, because the will was never changed. He hadn't anticipated dying so quickly, and she inherited both houses and the fortune. So she turned out okay, but when you see those buildings in BC, you should know that they've got a bit of a dark story to them. I was telling this story a couple weeks ago, and I just started chuckling because, not that the story is funny, but it made me think of when my mom turned 40, we were sitting around eating cake, and my dad, as a joke, said that he was going to trade her in for two 20-year-olds, which didn't go over that well. And my mom looked at all the kids and said, "Who are you going to go with, your mom or your dad?" And my sister's the oldest. She said she'd go with my mom. I was number two, kind of a mama's boy. I said I'd go with my mom. And I've got two younger brothers. The older one, he said that he was going to go with my mom. And the youngest one, he must have been 8 or 9. He looked at my dad and said, "You said two 20-year-olds, right?" "Yeah, I'll go with you." I reckon we're probably 25 minutes outside of the gardens, so I'll give you guys a heads up when we're getting a little bit close. We're just going to pull onto the highway in a moment, and then we'll be in the countryside in 5 minutes or so. intended to be a tourist attraction. It just sort of turned out that way. It's the biggest attraction on the island. They get over 1 million people a year. We come in the afternoon because it's usually a little bit less busy than it is in the morning. But this place, what it used to be before it was a garden, it's hard to believe, it used to be a cement factory. It was a family of Italian immigrants. They were called the Butchards, the Butchard family. And they bought this land out here because there's a very rich limestone deposit, which is one of the main ingredients for cement. So they were producing a lot of cement out of this area. They actually made a ton of money in this municipality of Saanich, creating and distributing cement. Right towards the end of Mr. Butchard's life, that quarry was beginning to run dry and they were starting to run out of limestone. They'd amassed enough money that the family could live comfortably for generations to come, but after he passed away, his wife, she wanted to create something kind of beautiful. And so next to their estate, which you'll be able to see the estate, it's still there. Next to the estate, she built her own little garden. And she had some friends come over and take a look at that garden. And they told her, you should expand it. It looks really beautiful, you should expand it. The land out here is very, very fertile. And so she did. She hired some people and they expanded it. And those same friends came back and they told her, you should start charging people money for it. Which she did. I got to the point where now they've got over 60 full-time gardeners. The gardens are over 50 acres in size. And like I said, over 1 million people a year come to visit them. So it's pretty remarkable. I challenge you to try to find one weed inside this garden. It's impossible. The place is absolutely immaculate. As a general rule, when you get inside the garden, or as a guideline, I guess, what I would recommend doing is try to stay left. Whenever there's kind of an opportunity to turn left, you should do so. And you'll have some maps. But if you kind of turn left, you'll end up, your first spot will be the Sunken Garden, which is the most kind of iconic and most famous bit of the Butchard Gardens. And you'll make your way around the entire gardens without having to double back if you sort of just turn left whenever you can. So I'll give everybody a map, or every group a map, and I'll give everybody a flower guide as well, or everybody that wants one. What the flower guide is, you can basically, anything that you see that you like, you can find a picture of it in the guidebook and figure out what it is, and then if you like, you're welcome to buy the seeds to that particular plant or flower in the gift shop. Be careful though, if you're going back to, say, Australia, don't bother, they won't let you into the country with agriculture like that. And we're going to have just over 2 hours in the gardens here, which should be plenty of time to kind of just take it slow. You won't feel rushed. come back and grab those from you. Guys, I'll be right back. I'm just gonna grab our tickets, and I gotta turn the bus off, but I'll leave the door open just to keep some air flowing.